Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Pondering God. My name is Ron Bay Jr., and today's episode is titled Stealing Government Cheese. So, government cheese, that is now a slang term, but back in the early 1980s, the government had a program called WIC, W-I-C, Women, Infants, Children. And in that program, women would qualify if they were of a certain income level. They would qualify to get milk and cheese and things for their children or the babies. I remember that program very well. And so something happened recently that reminded me of that. And it also reminded me of a study we're doing in the book of James. Tomorrow, actually, we're meeting to finish up something from James from the sermon from last week. The chapter we're working on right now is James chapter 4. And one of the questions for tomorrow, and the story that I'm going to tell you in a minute, reminds me of this, or is brought on by this question. So in James chapter 4, verse 6, it says, "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy to God." So what does this look like? What does this friendship with the world look like? And the question that comes tomorrow for the guys that are going to be meeting on Saturday morning, it says this: what does James mean by friendship with the world? So what does it mean to be a friend of the world and make yourself an enemy of God? And then I thought of some other scriptures that tie in with that as well. So in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul says it very well. And same thing that James said, and he just says it in a different way. He says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So Paul's encouraging us that way. And then another verse. So what does the world look like? What is this? What is the world? So I saw an example of it, and I'm going to share another scripture here in a minute. I saw an example of it when I went to the grocery store recently. So I went to the grocery store. I was going to buy a couple items, and as I got to the register, I ran into a couple that had quite a few bags of food in their hand. They were actually buying prepared food that you see in styrofoam containers. You go over a lot of these grocery stores now have a deli that prepares food, and so you can buy it already made and just take it home and eat it. And so each of them had a bag or two of this prepared food. And I said, go ahead in front of me. I'm not in any big hurry, so go ahead and go. So they put their stuff on the conveyor belt, and the stuff was running up, and the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, and he scanned the card to pay for his items, and the card didn't work. Tried it again. Card didn't work. And so he turned to his female partner, and she handed him her card. They scanned the card, didn't work. Tried it again, didn't work. So the cashier said, "You cannot use those kind of cards for this kind of food." So I immediately figured out what kind of cards those were. They aren't credit cards. They are some kind of a government SNAP card or an EBT card or some type of card that allows the so-called poor in the society to get things off the government, off of our taxes. So I thought, okay. Then he pulls out a wad of bills about that thick. And on the bottom of the wad of bills was a $100 bill, I noticed. And so he peels off several bills from the top of the pile and pays for his food, and they walk out the store. I just grinned at the cashier, and I paid for my stuff, and I followed shortly thereafter. And as I got into the parking lot with my shopping cart of stuff, I noticed them getting into their car, and it happened to be a Land Rover. I thought, sweet, that's pretty nice. But that just shows you, we hear a lot about fraud, government fraud, and people that are scamming the system. And there'll be a lot of people that would say, "Oh, that's okay. I mean, if I were in their shoes, I might do the same thing," or some kind of comment like that. No, I see that as I said in the title of this book, stealing government cheese. And when you steal from the government, who you're really stealing from? You're stealing from me and you and everyone else that pays taxes. But they didn't seem to be too bothered by the whole situation. They just kind of moved on like things were normal for them. So what does all that mean? I told that story to someone recently. Yesterday I told that story. And the first question they asked me was, how do they do that? How do they get government welfare cards whenever they have all that cash and whenever they have fancy vehicles and all those other things. And I thought, I don't really want to know how they did it because I don't want to do it. And I'm sure it's not that difficult. People are doing it all over the country to scamming the government. There's so much money to be scammed that there's many, many ways that you figure out how to do it. And just like the WIC program, whenever I was younger, I'm sure there were people that scammed that system and got their free cheese and free milk and things like that. And formula, I think formula was another one that was a part of that program. So what does it mean to be a friend of the world? And if the world is something to be warned against, James is warning us against that, because being a friend of the world is being an enemy of God. So what does that look like? Well, Paul wrote another letter to the Philippian church. And in this letter, he describes it a little bit differently. He says this to the Philippian church: do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. So we're to be the opposite of the world. If the world is crooked and perverse and they're stealing government cheese, we're to be blameless and innocent and appear to the rest of the world as lights in the world. So that's a challenge for us. And James tells us why we might fall into that trap. He says we lust for things that we cannot have. We desire things that we don't have, and that because of that, we do things that are wrong to obtain those things. We envy others of those things. And so if we're going to behave in a way that's not in the pattern of the world, and to be blameless and innocent, how do we do that? Well, the simple answer is we put our focus on the things above. And James goes on to tell us how. We're going to learn it tomorrow in our lesson. But we have to focus on allowing the Spirit to keep our eyes focused on God, keep our eyes focused on Jesus, as Hebrews says. And if we do that, then we'll forego our lusts and desires, and we'll desire the things that God desires. So if you haven't studied the book of James, I recommend it. And it's a very practical book. But this is just one lesson. Do not be conformed to the image of the world, or the pattern of the world. Or as James says, do not be friends with the world. So thought I'd share that observation with you this morning. And hope you have a great day, and join me next time on Pondering God. See you later.